Coming up on the Sarc Fighter podcast.
I get the call from my mother, and she says, I need you to come to the house. I need you to come downstairs. Your father is dead, is what she said. She was frantic.
Warren Robinson's father was the picture of health, and one day he just didn't wake up.
And my sisters were there, and we were baffled.
There was seemingly no explanation, so the family had to pay for an autopsy.
And we kept saying, something is not right here. We need this to be looked into. The sheriff reached out to the coroner's office, kind of conveyed that to them and said, listen, we don't see any medications here. There's, nothing that to us would indicate full natural causes. The coroner refused.
In this edition of the Sarc Fighter podcast, Warren shares the story of his father's death, but as a producer for Netflix and an attorney to boot, he wants to try and make a difference in the fight against sarcoidosis.
This is the Sarc Fighter podcast, living with sarcoidosis and other rare diseases. Here's your host, John Carlin.
Hello and welcome. Believe it or not, this is episode 50 of the Sarc Fighter podcast, brought to you in part by a grant from Atire Pharma. I'm your host, John Carlin, and a fellow Sarc Fighter. I do this podcast, as you've heard me say before, if you listen, to offer fellow Sarc Fighters and their caregivers and researchers, whoever it is, people in the sarcoidosis space, to maybe offer a little bit of hope and to help you connect with other Sarc patients, to hear their stories, understand how sarcoidosis affects their lives, and then hopefully that helps you understand what you're up against, gives you a little perspective, maybe what you need to overcome, whether it's the disease, the effects of the medicine, or both, dealing with doctors. Doctors, if you're listening, dealing with patients, understanding some of the frustrations are out there, because this is kind of a mysterious, I hate to say it, disease. And one of the greatest things that we can do in the fight against sarcoidosis, especially from my perspective as a media guy, my primary job is I'm a local news anchor, especially from my perspective, is to raise awareness of the disease, to get it out there so that people know to look for it, right? So many people start out with symptoms and nobody can figure out what's wrong with them, right? And the doctors don't know to look for it. Sarcoidosis is one of the last things they look for because it's an orphan disease. Let's face it. I mean, when you get out there and something is wrong with you, and it's not one of the more common things that doctors look for, it's not cancer, for instance, but something is not right. They look and they look and they look, and sarcoidosis is not on anybody's radar. So maybe if we can raise awareness, maybe doctors will get to that conclusion and look for it a little bit sooner, to get treatment started a little bit sooner. And then beyond that, there aren't a lot of great treatments to go to for 90% plus of sarcoidosis patients is prednisone, and prednisone is not a great solution. And it's not a permanent solution, or it's one of those things where the treatment is worse than the disease. So one of the things we'd like to have is more pharmaceutical companies and researchers saying, hey, there's something going on over here. There's this thing called sarcoidosis, and there hasn't been a lot of work on that maybe, but it's interesting. Maybe that's an autoimmune thing that I can focus on as I begin my career. And that's one of the things that the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research has become really good at, is identifying these young researchers who then jump into the space and can make a difference. So that's one of the reasons that I do this podcast. And I've noticed that there are some other people out there who have figured out that sarcoidosis awareness is really important in the fight. And how do I know that? Well, I'll go on my Instagram account, The Sarc Fighter. It's not just Sarc Fighter, it's The Sarc Fighter. And I'll put a hashtag for sarcoidosis, right? Well, on Instagram, if you've ever posted, it offers up some other common similar hashtags, and the hashtag sarcoidosis awareness always rises to the top, right? So that means to me that there's a lot of other people out there who are posting about sarcoidosis, and they use the hashtag sarcoidosis awareness. And that means that everybody is struggling to get this out there in front of the world, right? And so awareness is important for all the reasons that we can kind of infer. More people know about it, all those other things that I just talked about will happen. Well, today's guest, Warren Robinson, has an amazing story to tell, first of all. And I don't want to tell you too much about it right now. I want you to hear it from him. It's much better from him. He's a fantastic storyteller. But I will tell you that he has become an advocate for the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research because his father died suddenly and without explanation. And yes, it did turn out to be sarcoidosis. That's not a spoiler. That's kind of the beginning of the story, okay? But perhaps, just maybe, Warren can turn his family's tragic loss into something that can raise more awareness for sarcoidosis, maybe better than it's ever been done. And I say that, and I know this is a long shot, even for him, but Warren is not only motivated, but he works in the entertainment business. He is a producer and even has a show on Netflix. But he works with celebrities all the time because he's in the entertainment business. He's an attorney and he knows a lot of people in all the right places. So I don't know everything that there is to know about what it takes to get something going in literally the high stakes world of big time entertainment where people throw around millions of dollars the same way maybe I spend $100 at the hardware store. But who knows? I will tell you this much. Here is a family who lost a man who always did it right. He ate well, he exercised, he was a man of the cloth, a minister. He helped people every day of his life. And somehow, even for him, even for this family, sarcoidosis snuck in and took his life. And then the family had to fight, had to overcome stereotypes to get to the bottom of what caused his death. And it was not easy. And Warren will tell that story in the interview coming up. And he is determined to do something about it so it doesn't happen to the next family and the next family and the next family. And black or white or whatever, you are going to hear, I mean, he is African American, but that doesn't matter. I mean, there are certain issues that he has to overcome, but they're the same issues. They're the same issues everybody has to overcome. And it's just more magnified in this particular case, and he'll tell you why. And it has to do with statistics, and it has to do with stereotypes, and it has to do with everything that his family was facing. But it's the same thing a lot of families are facing. And his story is next here on the Sarc Fighter podcast.
I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying the Sarc Fighter podcast. You may be wondering, what can I do to help? How can I be a part of the sarcoidosis solution? It's simple. Make a donation to KISS, Kick In to Stop Sarcoidosis. 100% of the money goes to the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. Look for a link in the show notes of the Sarc Fighter podcast. Welcome back to the Sarc Fighter podcast. And joining me now is Warren Robinson, who has a unique, unfortunately, perspective on sarcoidosis. And he's going to tell us a little bit more about his commitment to maybe finding a new way to fight Sarc. Warren, thank you for joining me this morning.
Absolutely, John. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So listeners will know, because I'll have done a little introduction by this point, so that your father had a tough run with Sarc, and you guys took some pretty extreme action in order to discover that. But I want people to understand who they're listening to. So why don't you give us the thumbnail sketch of you and your background in the media and the legal field and all of that?
That should be easy. It's not that interesting. No. So I'm Warren D. Robinson, as he mentioned. My background in entertainment started actually when I was really, really young. When I was a teenager, I used to write plays, and I would write them and stage them and direct them and perform them mostly around my church and at different churches. It was fun. And so that's kind of where my dive into entertainment started. But then I had very traditional minded parents who were like, okay, that's cute and you're talented, but it's time to go focus on getting a real job. The kind of thing. So I figured, okay, I got to find a way to have a real job, make real money, and still stay in entertainment. So I wrote plays, and I used to, after starting writing plays, I was a model for a little while. I used to take pictures and do runway shows and stuff. It was fun.
No, so we're talking like Paris, Chicago, New York. What are we talking about?
Well, no, I wasn't that big, unfortunately.
Okay.
I wasn't. I didn't get to go to Paris, but no, locally, around the Midwest, Chicago, St. Louis, Indianapolis.
That's cool.
It was fun. It was fun, and I made a little bit of money from it. But no, I wasn't Tyson Beckford or anything. You didn't see me on the cover of Vogue or any of that. But I also never really, really, truly pursued it enough, because when you're a male model, you have to keep that 6 and that 8 pack together, and I like to eat, so it was always mine was always fluctuating there. But so I did that, and then after that went to college and decided that I went to go to law school. And I always wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a lawyer since I was like 5 years old, 4 or 5. I'm gonna age myself here, but when I was like 4 or 5, the O.J. Simpson trial was really big at that time. And I remember being like 5, standing in front of the TV. And I don't think I understood what was going on, but OJ had an attorney, Johnny Cochran. And I just remember looking up to Johnny Cochran and kept saying, I want to be Johnny Cochran. I want to be Johnny Cochran. So that was my introduction into law at a very early age. And so
interesting.
I went to law school, went to Howard, did that. And then after graduating, started working with artist management, doing contracts, negotiating deals on behalf of clients. I've worked with a lot of major corporations, a lot of the networks from NBC Universal to Viacom, a lot of corporations that were doing entertainment deals, Fortune 500s like Best Buy, Eli Lilly, a lot of celebrities, everybody from, so I used to do, I would do a lot of contracts for third-party events, and they would book celebrities. So we had everybody from, Taraji P. Henson to Vivica Fox to Pam Grier, did all of those. And recently got into the producing side of things, did my own film. I have a show now on Netflix called Buried by the Bernards, and I've worked on a lot of other shows that are currently out there. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Okay, well, that is really cool. So to say again the name of the show, because I had a little bit of an audio breakup. The name of your show on Netflix?
Yeah, it's called Buried by the Bernards. It's a great family comedy, so you'll really enjoy it. Buried by the Bernards, right there on Netflix.
Right. All right, I'm going to check it out. And is that a streaming thing where we can, where I can get hooked on it and watch it, episode after episode?
Yeah, and you know what? The episodes are really short and they're really funny and they all just flow. So you'll be done. You'll watch all 8 before you even know it, and you'll be like, "Oh, wow!"
Gotcha. So you've got all this amazing background, the legal mind, the legal background. You kind of know the lay of the land, and. So, but your dad,
yeah.
Tell us now the story of your dad. And let's start out with, he was a fit guy, and one day he had a heart attack. What happened?
Well, my father was extremely fit, and he took very good care of himself, extremely good care of himself. So, and he didn't have a heart attack.
I'm sorry.
Clear, it was. So let me back up.
Back it up.
When we found, so what happened was just out of the blue. I had actually talked to my father. It was a Thursday, matter of fact. I remember I talked to him. We had a great conversation. Everything, was normal. I left, and then that Friday, that next day, within, because I talked to him that night, so probably about 9 o'clock that night, so maybe within 13 hours, I get the call from my mother, and she says, I need you to come to the house. I need you to come downstairs. Your father is dead, is what she said. She was frantic, and I'm screaming like, okay, Mom, yeah, right. I didn't believe it because just saw my father, very fit guy, healthy. As far as we know, not a problem in the world. So it just didn't make sense. It didn't comport to me. So I get there, and my father is deceased in the bed. He'd passed in his sleep, and my sisters were there, and we were baffled, absolutely baffled about, okay, how is this possible? Because again, my father was the type of person who did everything that you're, I guess, supposed to do to live a long, healthy life, right? He ate right. He was very conscious about his diet. Unlike the rest of us, we were the ones who ate the French fries and the all the other stuff. My dad was very careful about, lean meats and turkey and doing this, and very fit, exercised every day, very healthy weight, had no pre-existing conditions at 70 years old, no conditions, wasn't overweight. So there were no risk factors. And he had just went to the doctor a few months ago. Lab work was fine. Blood work was fine. EKG test was fine. So we couldn't figure out how in the world did he pass away in his sleep. It just made absolutely no sense to us. Just none. Not Dad. It just, so I called 911, of course. We got the sheriff's department. They came by. We were initially saying, okay, look, we need to figure out what happened to Dad here, because it's not making sense. It's not adding up. How is this possible? This is a healthy, fit man with no underlying pre-existing conditions. We need to figure out what happened. They refused. They refused to do an autopsy. The coroner refused to come out. They said, you know what? He's a 70-year-old African-American male. It's probably a heart attack. And
right. So he died in his sleep. Did you say that?
Yes, he died in his sleep. Okay.
Correct. So your mom just came around the corner and there he was, and he wasn't moving. I mean, yes. I want to unravel that just a little bit to the extent that you're comfortable talking about it.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. She woke up that morning, because usually my dad's a very early riser. Again, just everything. He gets up and he's a very routine guy. So every day pretty much is the same thing. He wakes up at like 7:38. He does this exercise first thing in the morning. And so he's always up before my mother. That's just how he is. My mother's a late sleeper. He gets up, he does his exercise, he'll have his breakfast, which is usually like a banana and some oatmeal. And then, and then he goes about his day because he has a list of things he has to get done in the day. And so he's like on it. So it was a very routine thing. So when my mother woke up, and my father was still, as she thought, sleeping in the bed, she was actually surprised. And so she thought, he overslept. And so she turns and, she grabs him and she says, oh my gosh, she says, you overslept, old man. And I think it's at that time that she realizes, he had been dead for a few hours, because according to her, he was hard at that point. And so
rigor mortis had set in.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so she knew what that was. So she called us. She called me, and she called my older sister to come over there. And that's kind of, and so we did. As soon as I got the call, I got up and I rushed over there to see, okay, what's going on. And again, I didn't really believe it. I didn't know what it was. I thought, either he's asleep or it's some kind of joke or something, because Dad he just seems so healthy. It just never fathomed to me that would be the case. But when I got there, rigor mortis was in. It was very clear.
So wow. So you get there, you call, I guess, do you call a coroner? Do you call the ambulance? Do you call 911? Who do you call?
We call, so I call 911 actually. Which is ironic because at that point there was nothing they could do.
Right.
And so as I'm talking to the 911 operator, she's like, well, maybe we can give him CPR. I'm like, look, that's not even gonna work.
Right.
At this point, I can't even get him on the ground. He's he's stiff. So 911 sends the sheriff's department out, which is standard. they come out to the scene and document it. And we were talking to the sheriff, who's like, okay, died at home, nothing's disturbed, the body hasn't been disturbed. So he's kind of writing it up as a kind of natural scene kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we're talking to him and we're telling him, listen, though, this just doesn't make sense to us. There has to be something. He did not just have a heart attack. It just doesn't happen that way. My sister has a master's in nursing. She's been in the nursing field for, over 15 years. It doesn't just happen like that, to have no history of cardiac problems, to have no of the underlying risk factors of cardiac problems, to have a EKG done maybe 3 months before, and then to have such a massive cardiac event in your sleep, just out of the blue, that it kills you, is possible, but rare, unlikely.
Yeah.
And so we kept saying that, and we kept saying, something is not right here. We need this to be looked into. The sheriff reached out to the coroner's office, kind of conveyed that to them and said, listen, we don't see any medications here. There's, nothing that to us would indicate full natural causes. The coroner refused. They tell the sheriff on scene, hey, 70-year-old African-American male, write it up as natural cause. It's probably a cardiac event. We're not coming out. That was that. And he said, you can try to contact them yourself. He said, I can't get them to change their mind. They're not going to come out.
Right. So then your family decided, well, we're not going to take no for an answer, right? I mean, you're going to get to the bottom of this one way or another.
Well, because you know what? I think it's a lot of factors that go into that at that time. Emotionally, we're still trying to figure out how in the world did this happen, because we're not buying this heart attack exists. We're just not. My father, he took care of himself. There's no way in our minds that he had a heart attack, regardless of what they say. And it was so dismissive, John. And I think that's part of the problem that really upset us. So it's a matter of grief, non-belief, and being upset because the coroner's office really just completely dismissed what we were saying and dismissed the fact that we're telling you this is a healthy man. They just assumed, and it was their own words why I can say that they assumed this. They assumed because he was, again, an African-American male and he was 70, which in their eyes is super old, it had to be a heart attack. And that's all they would hear. And so when we're telling you, well, wait a minute, there's no signs there, there's no evidence of that, there's nothing to back that up, they wouldn't even hear it.
What city are we talking about here?
Indianapolis, Indiana.
Okay.
So we're in a big city. We're not even a small town. We're in a big city.
Yeah.
Indianapolis, Indiana. So we called the funeral home. They come, they get the body. I tell them, don't embalm me. That next day, I think it was a Friday. So actually on Monday, I'm back on the line with the coroner's office, again, trying to get them to, reverse this decision. You need to come check this body out. And they literally tell me, listen, we see this all the time. We guarantee you it was a heart attack. We're not coming. We're not going to do an autopsy. There's no reason for us to. And they list these quote unquote 7 factors that they have to determine whether or not an autopsy is performed. Suspicious death, a disturbed scene. And he definitely fit within those realms, because how can you not say the death is suspicious when there's no history of cardiac event? I mean, somebody could have poisoned him, you don't know. And they wouldn't have cared because, again, and I told him, because you said, because he's an African-American 70-year-old man, you're just going to assume it was a heart attack. And they said, yeah, it was natural causes,
Do African-American men die of heart attacks more often than Caucasian-American men?
That is actually what the coroners was telling us, is that yes, you see a huge amount, especially with African-American men around late 60s and 70s, cardiac events are quite common for that group. And we do know that there's a disparity in healthcare between African-American males and white males. And so what we see is that, but my father went to the doctor regularly. So that,
so they thought, here's a guy that probably didn't take care of himself, didn't have the proper medical care, things accumulated over time, he had a heart attack.
And they did not believe us when we were telling them that's not the case here. But they were simply said, well, we don't know it was a heart attack because we didn't do an autopsy, so we're just going to write it as natural causes, and that's what's going to be on the death certificate.
So what do you do with that? I mean, so who who I know you guys proceeded because we're going to get to a diagnosis of sarcoidosis. So what did you do?
The only thing after I kept trying to advocate, and I was very angry, and I was thinking about, the legal background of me. I'm like, can we sue? What can we do? And so finally, the funeral director actually kind of said to me, listen, I've dealt with this a lot. You're not going to get them to change their minds. At some point, we got to embalm Dad. We got to get him in. We got to get the ball moving. He said, why don't you, if you guys can afford it, just hire a private doctor, a private autopsy company to come in and give you the answers that you're looking for.
And where is your dad's body at this point?
It's at the funeral home.
At the funeral home. Okay,
Yeah,
got it. Okay, so you found a private company? We
did. We found a private doctor that has a private autopsy company. They performed the autopsy within a few days. And let me say that it's a shame that we had to do that. And that's part of the reason I'm an advocate now, is because that is something that families shouldn't have to do. Because let me tell you, it's a lot of money. It's not an affordable kind of thing. It's a lot of money. It has to be paid up front, obviously, and it has to be paid immediately because, you have to get that done because you still have to get the body embalmed. You still got to plan a funeral. So it has to be done within a few days. So, if they want $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, you have to be able to write a check, and you have to be able to write it right then. Luckily, we could afford that, but everybody can't.
Right.
Everybody can't. And that's what I guess scares me, makes me so upset, is because it feels like there are how many families have been told it was natural causes, which how do you get natural causes at 70? That's not old enough for natural causes in my view, but apparently the Marion County coroner disagrees with me. But to say natural causes at 70 without investigating, how many families have been told that? How many families have been told that their loved one died of natural causes or of a cardiac event when that's not really the case? And that's kind of where my passion comes in. But we paid the private autopsy company. They did the autopsy within a day or two. And then after the autopsy is done, we can then begin the process of, embalming Dad, planning for a funeral. My father was a pastor.
Okay.
He'd been a pastor for 20 plus 30 years. Very popular in the community, a community advocate. He really believed in giving back and helping to so many people. In fact, the day before he died, he was out delivering food boxes to folks and carrying these boxes up steps with no issues. It was just so unbelievable to everybody. But it was a big funeral, and it was a difficult thing to navigate because we're in the middle of COVID at this time. It was 2020. We're in the middle of COVID. We're trying to navigate how to play. Now, we were at the end of the year, so it was at the tail end. We weren't in the height of COVID. We were coming out of it, kind of so. But it was a very tough thing to navigate between how do we plan this service for this, big momentous guy in the community, but still, stay strict to COVID protocol. So it's all of that going on. We do that. We have the funeral. And then about a week later, we get the results from the private doctor.
And what were the results?
So he comes in and he tells us that what he noticed was these kind of white granunomas inside the heart. And he said, so we've seen these, I see them in the heart. And it's interesting because Dad didn't have them anywhere else. So they weren't in the lungs. They weren't, because people, and I know the listeners with sarcoidosis will know, usually, it starts in the lungs, it starts in the spleen, other body parts. Dad didn't have it in the lungs. Didn't have it in the spleen. If he had it in the lungs, he might have known. There may have been some sign or some symptoms, but he didn't have it there. So there were no signs. It was just in the heart. And he said, we're seeing these granulomas in the heart. He said, that leads me to believe that this is sarcoidosis. And I'm thinking, okay, what is that? I'd never heard of it. And he says, it looks like he had sarcoidosis in the heart, and that what happened was it caused an arrhythmia overnight, which is basically where the rhythm of the heartbeat is interrupted. And so he had a fatal arrhythmia at night. The heartbeat got interrupted and it couldn't essentially catch itself back up. And that's why he passed in his sleep. And, I guess there was some peace in that. It would have been very peaceful. He wouldn't have noticed it. It would have been quick. And I guess if anybody has to pass, that is the best way to go, right? In your sleep, peaceful, without being aware of it. So that's what it was. It would have happened suddenly. It would have been quick. And so that's kind of what it was. But we were glad we had a diagnosis. And I think that was so important for us because we would not have been able, I don't know where I would be or if I would be able to move on if I hadn't pursued this to figure out what was it that that took my father, because I just it just would have we just couldn't figure it out. And so at least to have a diagnosis put on him to say, okay, he had cardiac sarcoidosis, at least we know now. And because I will tell you, John, the things that run through your head in the weeks in between, you're always thinking, was he hiding something from us? Was there some disease that he didn't tell us about? I will tell you, I didn't even tell you this part. At one point, me and my sister actually went to his doctor's office because we're thinking you had to miss something. Like, how did you let my father die? Like, what secret are you hiding us? And so all these conspiracy theories ran through our head that dad was hiding the secret disease from us and maybe he didn't tell us. And so we're actually at the doctor's office like, hey, tell us, because he wouldn't, how you call the doctor, you get the nurse, you can't get the doctor on the phone. He wouldn't answer the phone. And so that Friday we drove to his office.
Really?
We're sitting in the office like, hey, you're going to talk to us. Like, we want to talk to him. And so he finally does. He comes out and he talks to us and he's like, listen, there's no secret. He said, there's nothing there. I don't know. He says, I don't know either. And so in Indiana, for the coroner to sign off on the death certificate on natural causes, the primary care doctor has to sign off. And so the coroner's office that Friday afternoon had already sent the death certificate to be signed by his doctor. Yeah. And so the doctor said, well, listen, if you guys don't think this was natural, and he said, I don't know what caused it either. He said, I don't think it was a cardiac event. He said, I won't sign it. And so he didn't. And that's one of the reasons, too, why we were able to get the private autopsy, because the death certificate wasn't finalized because his primary care doctor would not sign the death certificate. He refused to sign it until we got the autopsy results back. And so once we got the autopsy results back, we sent it in to his primary doctor. They signed the death certificate, but that's how we found out that he had cardiac sarcoidosis, which again, we're like, sarcoidosis, what is this? We had never heard of it.
Never heard of it, right?
Had never heard of it.
Yeah, that's so many people I interview, they wind up with it. Never heard of it.
And, my sister had been in healthcare for years at that point, for over a decade. She'd heard of sarcoidosis, but she'd always known it as a primarily a lung disease. And she did not know it as, in its cardiac form. And she'd never had a patient with sarcoidosis. And she's been in healthcare. She's been working at, one of the major hospitals in the city for over a decade, never encountered it. And so the autopsy doctor was great. And he really walked us through what sarcoidosis was, how it's formed, something that, in his words, it was somewhat of a relief, because I think my older sister especially took it really hard, because she had always been dad's kind of, and my mom's kind of primary advocate for their health care, right? She's the one that's making sure they go to the doctor's appointments. She's the one that's looking over their results. And I think she really blamed herself and felt like, how did I miss this? And so hearing the autopsy doctor say, listen, this is something that, because it's only in the cardiac, there would have been very few, if any, symptoms, and we can't pinpoint that he had any. And it would have been something that would not have come up in the kind of normal testing that he would have been getting.
Yeah, unless he was, I've interviewed a couple of cardiac Sarc patients, and what I hear was, they had trouble going upstairs. They got a little bit winded because their heart wasn't functioning properly, and it was enough that somebody went looking for it. And I'm almost thinking, wow, your dad was so fit that he was able to overcome what might have been, if he was a little bit heavier, if he didn't eat quite so well, he might have had a symptom, so they could have gone looking for it.
And you know, that's something that we've wrestled with as well. If he had been, you know, a little sicker, maybe they would have done more. I don't know.
Yeah.
But they, you know, any symptoms that he had would have been mild. He certainly didn't know them. We certainly didn't see them. And they never, like you said, it's something that you have to look for. They never looked for. There was never, you know, Dad never had any echocardiograms done. He never did anything because there was never any need to, as far as they were concerned. And that's part of the problem. And that's part of the legacy in which I'm fighting for, is to say, well, why don't we do more testing? Because there can be underlying things. A person can seem very healthy, because we love, especially, you know, in America, we love to say, oh, well, this person's healthy because they look healthy, or they're a certain body weight or something. But that's not necessarily true.
Not necessarily true. Yeah.
The perfect example. He's the perfect example of somebody who looks healthy on the outside, but had something underlining. And listen, we don't know how long he had it. We don't know when he would have showed up or what it was. It's probably something that occurred long term. Who knows? We don't know how he developed it. There's a lot of questions there that we just don't know, but we do know that they never looked for it. They never did anything beyond the standard, you know, blood testing, EKG testing, which it didn't show up in. All those results came back good. You know, cholesterol's good, blood levels are good. So they never did any further testing. So they were never able to find out that he had it. And so we started doing the research, and, you know,
now I wanted to connect that dot, because if you know, like me, or pretty much anybody who winds up within the space of the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, which is kind of, you know, the mothership, you know, did the research lead you to FSR and your decision to maybe try and do something about it? Or how did that work?
Yeah. So after we found out that this was what it was, we did a huge deep dive into figuring out, okay, what is this disease? How is it, you know, how did he possibly get it? Is it genetic? Like, there were a lot of things that we had questions about, that we wanted to know beyond what, again, the doctor had told us. And he was great. He gave us a lot of information. And so we started doing the research, and that is how I came upon FSR. And they did a great job of compiling a lot of information as well, and helping us kind of understand what, you know, sarcoidosis is as a whole, and how it can manifest in so many other parts of the body, and what to look for. And so that's kind of how I got associated with them.
Got it. So, and of course, you've got this wonderful background in media, and, you know, a law degree. And so you reached out and said, how can I help? And they said, oh, well, welcome aboard. You know, we could slot you in lots of different places if you're willing to do it. So, like me, you're now an advocate, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I know you've just been onboarded, as it were, recently with the organization. What do you think? What are your impressions now that you're sort of here and you're getting a lay of the land?
Yeah, no, I am very impressed with the whole team. I'm impressed with all the work that they do in education and advocating and trials and so much. And I'm just here to be a help to that, because I feel that this disease is a lot of people don't know about it. I can't help but feel that there are, and we do know it's a rare disease, but I can't help but feel there are possibly more folks out there who have either passed from this or have this and just have no idea. Because, again, it's something that doctors have to actually look for. It's something they have to go test for in certain versions. And I'm talking specifically about cardiac version, right? And when you see the numbers and you do the research and you see how many people have sudden death as a result of having the cardiac version, you ask yourself, okay, you know, how many other folks out there have maybe had a cardiac event from the cardiac version and have been simply told it's a heart attack and never did the testing, didn't have $6,000 to pay a private doctor to figure out that, you know, it was sarcoidosis. And so it's not diagnosed. And though it's not hereditary, that's important because it can have a genetic impact. So there can be a genetic component to it. And so people need to know if this is something that is in their family so that they can get tested for it. And you can advocate for yourself and say, you know what, hey, maybe this is something I need you to look a little bit deeper. And so that was important to me. And then, you know, my father being such a community guy, he would have wanted us to use anything we could, especially his passing, in a way that helps as many people as possible. And so that's really important to me, is to make sure that he did not pass in vain, because I still have a hard time processing all of this, because, you know, there's such an unfairness, I should say, that I feel. And I know, I guess everybody who loses someone feels that way, but there's an unfairness in the fact that, you know, Dad worked so hard to do everything that you're supposed to do, right? To live a very long life. And by all intents and purposes, he should have had that. And to be robbed of that, and you know, after all the sacrifices he made in terms of how he lived and what he ate and, you know, where he went, and, you know, Dad never smoked, he never drank, he did all this. And I feel like, okay, this is the only way that I can make sure that none of that was in vain, is to make sure that in his name, I continue to advocate and continue to help somebody and continue to encourage people to make sure that, you know, they're finding out what, you know, is happening to their relatives, and to make sure that this disease, if you have it in your family, that you're aware of it, that you're getting treated, that you're asking your doctors about it. So that's kind of where what I see my role in helping FSR do more of, is just kind of educate and advocate and say, hey, here it is, here's the disease, and letting more people know about it.
Well, so, and now I want to get to that, because the reason, other than the fact that it's just really interesting and phenomenal, but your skill set with being a Netflix producer and negotiating contracts for celebrities and event planning and the legal background, you know, so when I look at somebody who's motivated and has a reason to help, and then brings all that sort of background to the table, you know, I'm glad you're here. Holy cow, this is amazing. Have you had any ideas sort of percolate up about, you know, what somebody within your position might be able to do to sort of change the world's perception or knowledge of sarcoidosis, or bring it to the forefront in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm still developing creatively exactly what I want to do. I've only been with the foundation for a relatively short time. So I think going into next year is really kind of a launch pad for me to really start putting some stuff into motion and say, okay, here's how we can do it. So like you said, my background is in entertainment, in media, and the intersection of entertainment and law, because I do mostly entertainment law, right? I'm not the guy you want to call if you get arrested.
Right, gotcha.
But when
unless you want to negotiate a contract with the police, right?
Exactly. I can do that. So pulling that intersection together is really where I'm at. And so really just helping to garner media attention, which is something that I'm good at, finding ways to create creative campaigns, whether it's through, you know, video and social media, that kind of thing is something that I'm really good at. And so we're going to pull that together, and I'm going to pull my team together and figure out, okay, what's some creative ways we can really go about promoting and bringing attention and bringing awareness. The foundation actually has a lot of great initiatives that they're putting together. And so putting a spotlight on those initiatives and giving them the opportunity to talk about those to a broader audience is something that I hope to bring into the foundation. So really a matter of just bringing in that creativity and those media connections and helping them kind of advance that mission so that they can get a little bit more attention for what they're doing and what's going on. And hopefully that translates into, you know, dollars and awareness and all that good stuff.
Yeah. So, you know, 2022 is right around the corner as you and I are speaking now. I'd see, you know, wouldn't it be amazing, for instance, and I'm just thinking, wow, here's a guy that's already got a series on Netflix. What if you could develop a drama around a family that had sarcoidosis, and everybody's watching on Netflix, and they're watching it because it's a great drama, but everybody's talking about, the more often you use the word sarcoidosis, the more people who are aware of it, and it can be an African-American family, and they can be fighting all the issues that African-Americans fight and being dismissed, and all those trigger points in terms of just writing a script. And I'm bringing in my news version of understanding. Something like that is like, whoa, that would be a total game changer for sarcoidosis.
Yeah, it would be. Maybe that's something we could do down the line. I don't know. I definitely think that is a possibility. I would say that's definitely going to be a very long-term kind of project.
Sure.
Those kind of scripted projects take years to pull off. So I'm definitely, but I'm open. I'm game to it. So I definitely think that there are, for me anyway, there are immediate things that we can begin doing, and then kind of some of the long term. So like you said, film, movies, television series, scripted, unscripted, those are kind of some of my long-term goals. And so it's just a matter of sitting down and figuring out, okay, which one do we start with? Which one do we want to start with? How do we want to go? Because they all take so much time. So if you're doing a series of that nature, something that requires a lot of buy-in and a lot of moving pieces. So, just sitting down and kind of making that game plan and saying, okay, maybe this is something we could do for 2024. And, we can begin building the building processes of that. So I like that idea though. I might work on that script. I like that.
Well, let me know if I can help, but I don't know what I would do, but
you can do a lot.
Since I landed it on you, it's like, whatever I could do to help. But I just, I'm intrigued by the process, and I'm intrigued by the fact that you're at the table and that you're motivated to try and help. And, I just think it's, there's a reason that you're here.
Yeah. No, I absolutely believe that. As I said, my father was a minister. I've always grown up as a person of faith, and we've always been taught in the faith that God doesn't make any mistakes, and that everything happens for a specific reason at a specific time. And while we never truly understand why everything happens, we accept it and we say, okay, this must be where you want me to be at this moment. And so it's my belief that, God would want me to use what happened to my father to help as many people as possible. And that's what I'm trying to do. And so.
Yeah. Did your dad look like Denzel Washington by any chance? I'm thinking of a fit guy about that age.
Well, I think
Let's see the picture.
Let's see. Well, this isn't a whole body shot, but that's him and my mom.
Yeah, okay. That's not far off. I mean, with the goatee and everything there. Yeah.
He kept me, my father was very proud of the fact that he could still grow a full afro and beard, even at his age. His hair never thinned. So, and I have that gene as well. I have to keep it this low. Like I have to get it cut like every week and a half. Otherwise it just grows and grows and grows. So I have that gene, and don't tell anybody. My sisters do too, but yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
They don't like it as much though.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, look, man, I am just so glad that you're on board with the rest of us who are trying to get the word out about sarcoidosis, and I just am thrilled to have you here. I'm sorry that it had to happen the way that it did with the loss of your dad. But I hear that dedication in your voice, and I just am really looking forward to whatever you can do or can be done. I don't want you to have to do it all by yourself, because you've joined the group, and I'm sure that FSR will help however it can with whatever you want to do to try and raise awareness.
Absolutely. They've been extremely supportive, and we're really going to get the ball rolling next year. Time is always, just figuring out the time thing has been the hardest thing, like for me. We're definitely going to get the ball rolling, and I'm excited. I really am, to bring awareness to the sarcoidosis community.
All right, Warren, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I feel zombie, just feeding and stumbling.
So thanks so much to Warren for joining me here today. And not just for joining me here on the podcast, but for all he is hoping to do going forward. And if I can magnify his voice just a little bit more by putting it out there, then I am so happy to be able to do that here with the podcast, where we've now had tens of thousands of downloads, and things are still going up here on the Sarc Fighter podcast. So I hope that it helps just a little bit to give voice to what Warren is trying to do. But a man with his talent, his connections, might be able to move the needle when it comes to sarcoidosis, raising awareness, and that leads to the other good things we talked about before the interview and during the interview, and maybe makes life just a little bit easier for the rest of us who are dealing with sarcoidosis in some way, and more importantly, for those people down the road who don't have sarcoidosis yet, or don't know they have sarcoidosis, but when they go to fight the disease, maybe they'll have more options, and maybe it's because of Warren and his work and his raising awareness. So it was truly an honor and a privilege to have him on as a guest here today. A couple of other things. The official Sarc Fighter song, I mentioned this in all my podcasts, but it's a great song. It's called Zombie, by another talented entertainer, Mark Steyer, and his band, the White Hot Lizards from Canada. And Mark shared his story. He was a hockey player, and one day things just weren't right. Yeah, it was sarcoidosis. And he shared his story way back in episode 12. And occasionally I'll play the entire song for you at the end of an episode. In fact, I did that at the end of episode 41. So maybe go back and listen to those lyrics and see if they aren't telling your story too, or the story of your loved one. I call this the Sarc Fighter podcast because I'm fighting Sarc. I have neurosarcoidosis. And whether you're a caregiver, a patient, a researcher, or a family member like Warren, you're here in this space, and that's why you're listening to the Sarc Fighter podcast, where we gather and you don't have to feel like you're so all alone. And again, I want you to know that there's a reason for hope. And as I say this, one of the things that makes me so happy is that as I work on these podcasts and release every other Monday, my trusty rescue dog, Dougal, a boxer that we rescued when he was 8 weeks old, is curled up right here on the chair in my office. And he makes my life so much better. Hey, I'm going to share with you two things before I go today, two more reasons for hope. And these are great things that are happening with the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. And I want to let you know that they have given out $50,000. So when you donate to FSR, you say, well, where does the money go? Well, they've donated 2 small research grants to support smaller scale or pilot research projects. And basically, these get the research going for those guys that I talked about. And the goal of the small research grant is to provide early career and established sarcoidosis researchers financial support so they can get pilot data and then pursue hopefully innovative research that might otherwise not be funded. And so I'll tell you just very quickly about 2 of them. They received 11 grants, 11 applications this year, and they awarded $50,000 toward the 2021 research grants. FSR announcing 2 awardees to Manish Bhargava, MD, PhD from the University of Minnesota, and Peter H.S. Sporn, MD from Northwestern University. Dr. Bhargava is an associate professor of pulmonology, allergy, critical care, and sleep medicine for his proposal, Comprehensive Assessment of Signal Transduction Pathways in Sarcoidosis, and that is a mouthful. But basically, he'll be addressing inflammation in sarcoidosis, commonly treated with steroids like prednisone, which I've talked about a lot and which is not great, and it has severe side effects that may worsen the quality of life in patients. And his study will provide the foundational work for a new group of medications called kinase inhibitors as a potential sarcoidosis treatment. And so what they'll do is they'll gather inflammatory cells from the lungs and the blood and computational analysis using state-of-the-art technology to identify certain enzymes that promote sarcoidosis inflammation. And then they'll look for inhibitors that can be used to reduce the inflammation that are not prednisone. So he's looking for a new way to help fight the inflammation that we get with sarcoidosis. And then Peter Sporn, MD, is the director of Northwestern Sarcoidosis Center of Excellence, professor of medicine, cell and developmental biology, and medical education at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine. He received $25,000 for assessment of the immune response to SARS-CoV-2, that's COVID. That's a fancy way of saying COVID vaccination in sarcoidosis. And Dr. Sporn and his colleagues at Northwestern are basically conducting a study. They're measuring the immune responses to COVID vaccination in people with sarcoidosis, people who have sarcoidosis being treated with immunosuppressive medications, and others with sarcoidosis who are not on treatment will be studied, and then also vaccine responses in both groups will be compared to the responses in healthy people. So in other words, we're all taking these autoimmune medications, and then we get the COVID vaccine, and the question is does that work, or do these drugs that we're taking maybe shut down the effectiveness of the drugs that we take? So you're taking an autoimmune drug and then you give yourself a vaccine, and that's basically supposed to create an immune response in your body. Well, is it going to work? Is it going to work? And this is one of the things that Dr. Sporn will be treating. And I did a whole podcast on this with many leading experts, including Dr. Sporn. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. But the important thing to remember is you see a lot of fundraising requests from the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. And I do a lot of work in the fundraising space, not just for sarcoidosis, but I'm on a couple of local boards here in Roanoke, Virginia, where I'm based. And the majority of the giving to nonprofits happens in the fourth quarter of the year. And of course, by the time you hear this, Giving Tuesday will have passed. But this is the time of year when people try to figure out where to send their money. And I would say, and I would hope that you would join me in making a donation to the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. And it's very easy to do. I'll put a link to FSR, as I always do, in the show notes. But the money goes to fund these types of projects. It goes to raise awareness, but it also goes right to where the rubber meets the road with these doctors who are doing innovative research and trying to figure out what's causing sarcoidosis, what's causing the inflammation, and they get right down to the cellular and biological level that's, for the most part, too complicated to talk about here on the podcast. Very difficult to do that at a level where the average listener can understand it. But just know that it's happening, and know that that's maybe a great place here at the end of the year for you to make a donation. And any donation is always appreciated. Some people have deeper pockets than others, but it's just good to know that that's out there. And as we're here at the end of the year, maybe something you could consider for the reasons that I just mentioned. Now, if you are new here and you're trying to figure out what sarcoidosis is, go back and listen to episode 2 with Dr. Simon Hart. It's one of the most listened to episodes, and he talks all about what sarcoidosis is, what's going on in your body. My story, if you're trying to figure out my deal, is episode 1. The backstory to the founding of the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research is episode 11 with Andrea and Redding Wilson. They started this whole thing. Andrea is a fellow Sarc Fighter, and her husband Redding is a very effective person in terms of getting things done. And they looked around 20 years ago and said, there's nobody fighting this like there is cancer or other diseases that you hear about, breast cancer, Coleman, all these others. And they started the foundation, and so the backstory is there. Would you like to be on the Sarc Fighter podcast? I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to hear your story. Send me an email. It's in the show notes, carlinagency@gmail.com. And also follow the Sarc Fighter on Instagram and Facebook. Let's work on that awareness thing. Help me push this stuff out. I appreciate your interest. And if you would just share this podcast with one person, just take the link, share it, push it out there in your social media. Let people know that you listen to the Sarc Fighter podcast. Maybe you found Warren's story particularly intriguing. Maybe you're interested in the research we just talked about. But help me reach more people. Help me raise the awareness. That's why I'm doing this. Give the show a nice review on wherever you listen to your podcasts. And thanks again to Warren D. Robinson for joining me here today. Let's hope his creative mind helps us find a way to beat the disease. Until next time, keep fighting.
It would be so much easier to grieve if I had a breath to breathe. I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling. Learn to suffer, you feel pain someday. Learn endurance, your strength will fade away. Dead man walking, trying to keep up the pace. Dead man walking, counting down his days. And I don't know what will come. Look for silver linings, but still I find none. There was potential, slipping gone. It feels torrential, but I'm holding on. I'm holding on. I'm holding on. The fear I fight every single night. Whoa, I'm still upright. Find a way to try and adapt your life. It's not the why, but the how that plagues my mind. A new perspective, appreciate what you've got. We're dead men walking, in an instant it could be gone. And I don't know what will come. Look for silver linings, but still I find none. There was potential, slipping gone. It feels torrential, but I'm holding on. I'm holding on. I'm holding on. The fear I fight every single night. Whoa, I'm still upright. Wherever there is happiness, fight to be there too. And wherever there are friendly smiles, try hard to smile too. And wherever there is sunshine, don't let fear darken you. And whatever happens, please remember